Hello everybody, I'm Alyssa from Meditative Astrology. Today we're going to walk through the astrology of August 9th through 15th. We have a ton of aspects including that solar eclipse in the sign of Leo, so we're going to get into all of that. Before we do, if you have not already, go ahead and take a moment to subscribe to the channel so that way you don't miss anything that we have going on here. These weekly videos, they come out every Saturday morning so you can have them ahead of the upcoming week. And then we typically have live meditation Sunday nights 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. And really the goal there is to take the astrology from the week, bring it down to a personal level. Come down to that quiet, contemplative, meditative space where you can really create personal relationships and really create more meaning within the astrology. Bring it down to your own life, to your own level, and see where you find the meaning and find the connections there. It becomes much more personal and much more relatable, and find ways to connect to it better. This week, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of meeting on Sunday, we're going to meet on Wednesday, the day of the solar eclipse, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to do a solar eclipse meditation. So I will typically see you on Sundays, but this week I will see you Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. I'm so excited to do something a little bit different here. If you find us on social media, Facebook and Instagram, that's where you'll find other miscellaneous posts, announcements. Typically, there is a weekly intention that is released on Fridays that goes along with the Sunday night meditation that will resume next week when we come back to our regular schedule. So again, I'll see you this Wednesday, August 12th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, right here on YouTube for a live solar eclipse meditation. Let's go ahead and get right into this week here, shall we? Now, typically, you know that we have little cards or banners that are on the side of my screen. I'm doing something a little bit different, and I'm trying to go without them this week here. It's an idea that I've been toying with, and since the meditation is shifting a little bit this week, I thought it would be a good week to try it. So you all let me know how helpful those cards are. If you use the information, if you write them down, I have usually lunar aspects that are on there. That's something I don't necessarily talk about, but I write it on there so that way you have it. So let me know what you think of this format versus having the cards on the side of the screen. If this is your first week here, welcome, and you can go back to last week's video to see what I mean about the cards that are usually kind of on the side here. So, all right, let's go ahead and get into this week, shall we? We start out on Sunday, August 9th, with the moon in the sign of Gemini before it moves into the sign of Cancer. This is the day that Mercury is going to move into the sign of Leo, adding to the pileup of planets that we are going to have here as this solar eclipse comes through the middle of the week. Mercury moving from the sign of Cancer into the sign of Leo is going to be much more expressive outwardly. The sign of Leo looks for authentic expression. It speaks proudly, right? Or it speaks its message based on autonomy. There's messages of upliftment that can come through here. There's encouragement. There's generosity towards the self and towards others. I think about my will be heard, right? Like what I have to say will be heard. Think about how Mercury is the planet of communication, of words, of messages. Leo is the place of the sun, authentic expression, and we have that solar eclipse coming through here this week. We just had the Jupiter Cazimi. We've had a lot of Leo energy in like the initiatory and just starting new things in the sign of Leo here. So it's like, what is lighting up within you? Mercury in the sign of Leo may help us voice that or get that message out, get those words or that communication from inside and bring it more extrovertedly. Mercury and Leo, especially natives that have Mercury and Leo in their chart, sometimes they can have a very magnetic personality. There's a lot of pride. There can be some flattery that's in there, whether it's towards the self or towards others or towards both. And it can be a little bit performative too, right? Leo is the place of the sun. It is the place of the spotlight. So there can be a little bit of a central focus, we'll say. It can seem a little self-centered and more of the shadow expression, sure. But really what it is it's just looking for that true, authentic expression. So there we are starting out on Sunday. And then if we go ahead and move forward into August 10th here, we have Venus trining Pluto. I'm going to go ahead and put the chart up so that way you can all kind of see what we're working with. So this chart is set for Monday, August 10th. You can see that Venus is at 3 degrees of Libra here, and she's making that exact trine to Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. Now I want to take our attention to the other air sign, which is the sign of Gemini, where Uranus is. Venus is going to make that trine to Uranus later on this week. But if you look at the degrees, we have 3, 3, and 5 here. So within activation range for all 3 of these planets, with Venus moving through these early degrees of Libra and connecting with Uranus and Pluto simultaneously, we almost have a kind of loosely configured grand air trine here where communication and speech and presenting different ideas and intermingling different ideas may really be coming through here this week. So I just kind of want to point that out before we break down Venus trining Pluto. We mentioned that this is an air sign. These are masculine signs here. When you have any planet coming into contact with Pluto in an air sign, there can be deep mental and social and communicative expression that comes here. I think about mental stability and cohesion, specifically with Venus being in the sign of Libra. Remember that Venus rules the sign of Libra. Relating to others without losing ourselves can be key here with Venus in the sign of Libra, because it can be a little self-sacrificing in the way that it really kind of wants to keep the peace, right? It wants to keep things level. It wants things to be balanced and cohesive on a mental level, on the air element level here. So Venus in Libra really wants to harmonize, it wants to stabilize, it wants to be able to move forward with that flowing, balancing way. Remember that this is the cardinal air sign. Opinions, ideas, thought processes, and ideologies can be explored here. It's like what unites and what separates us in different type of ways here, right? I think about the unity when we're talking about Libra, we're talking about Venus in the sign of Libra. And then when we look at the sign of Aquarius, being the air sign of Saturn, we look at places and boxes and, descriptions and groups that we fit into, and then the boxes that we also don't fit into, or the boxes that we really would like to fit into, as well as the ones that we really don't care to try to fit into. So it's like what unites and what separates us at the same time. I think about social systems here, our individual roles and parts, as well as the group orientation. Where is our role within a greater scheme and a greater framework? But where can we find that place without losing ourselves at the same time and still honoring and being true to ourselves here? How can we bring peace, understanding, and unity to the whole? So that's the individual as well as the whole group process here at the same time. When we think about Pluto, we can't hide away from the word transformation, right? What transformational processes can elevate our understanding? Is it working and is it fitting within the social role? Are we moving outside of that space in some sort of way? Social signs these are social signs as they are air, right? Pluto can often move into hidden spaces. So I think about, are there hidden elements, are there hidden strengths or connections that can be explored or come to light? The trine is of the nature of Jupiter. So the trine is an expansive aspect where what the two planets have to offer can come together here in some sort of way. So it's like, are there mental strengths? Are there hidden elements that can come together to help us? Is there something that can come to light that you can shine a spotlight on, for better or for worse, whatever we're putting the light on, that can allow us to come to a greater understanding of some kind, right? Or see something or a different perspective, or consider a new idea, or brainstorming, or somebody else offers us a suggestion or gives us some sort of help or some sort of advice of some kind of like that. Where do our personal relationships intersect with broader groups and systems that are within our lives here? How do the relationships in our lives affect our lives, right? Venus in the sign of Libra, Venus on her own, and Libra on its own, by the nature of being connected to Venus, has a lot to do with the way that we relate to others. So it's a lot about relations, and then by extension, the different relationships that we have. Those can be romantic and otherwise here. There's a great power and strength that can come from within when we're talking about Pluto here. So Pluto is strength and power, but it's also uncovering of material to process. So this transit, since it's the trine, and then we have that, that loose kind of grand air trine here, this transit could be very healing and very soothing for some on the mental level. So if there's been mental strain, if there's been things that have been difficult for us to process, this aspect may help us pull through that. And then the strength that can come from that is a deep-seated strength that comes from down underneath the grounds. I was contemplating meditating on Pluto earlier this week, and one of the things that comes to mind for me are like the roots of a plant. So think about how if you have a house plant, you really just see what's above the dirt, right? Or what's above the pot. But underneath, within the container, within the dirt, there is a whole network of roots. There's a whole system of communication and intricacy that we can't necessarily see. However, the deeper those roots go and the bigger and the stronger they are, the more stable that plant is, right? I think about how most of my houseplants, I water them from the bottom of the pot. So I take the pot with holes or a ceramic pot or whatnot, and I place it in water and I submerge it in water, and it draws that water up from the bottom to the roots. And that actually encourages the roots to dig down, reach down a little further, because that is where the water is coming from. So when you think about that nourishment that can come from these deep, darker, shadowy, moist areas, kind of like within a plant, you can start to think about the power and the strength that can come from Pluto. Sometimes within dirt, we use compost. So we use decomposing material that really is a product of death and decay, right? But it's nurturing to the soil and to the roots, and they actually crave it and they move towards it. You can think about the underground networks that mushrooms work off of and the communication that they have within each other. These are some different ideas, different things that we see within the natural world that can relate to Pluto. Now, when Pluto comes into play, it can be very forward and very upfront, to where it's like so in your face that there's no denying whatever the thing is. But sometimes Pluto can come through in hidden messages or different perspectives, or flipping things kind of upside down. When I think of Pluto, I think about the book The Dream in the Underworld by James Hillman. And a couple of the things that really popped out for me in that book is when we talk about the dream world, which is the realm of Pluto, there are no rules, right? Dreams defy logic. The imagery and the scenarios that we find ourselves in often defy logical reality and things that can happen within real life, right? There might be elements of reality in it, but often things are kind of skewed in some sort of way. Not always, but often that's the case. So it's kind of like a different perspective. And when we think about that different perspective, or like a flip perspective, he also speaks about the underworld, or the space of Hades, being an upside down world where souls are actually walking like on the ceiling upside down. So it's a flip, it's a different perspective. It's turning things topsy-turvy and turning them upside down and seeing what can happen. Now, for some of us, those Pluto moments can bring like tower moments, right? Where things flip awfully quickly and they crash at the same time. This is a trine, so this feels more on the helpful and more on the expansive aspect, right? Especially with that interaction with Uranus that we have coming through here. Venus is in the superior position. She's in her home sign. She's very well dignified. This feels very powerful and very strengthening. So instead of the tower moment and the topsy-turvy that's going to, take your stack of papers and flip them all over the room, it feels much more like the plant roots that are reaching down within for strength and for stability to be able to express what is above the plant, right? Plants can't grow if they don't have the proper root system. And you don't see that root system until you like take it out of the pot and you analyze it, until you go deep within the dirt or the underworld of that plant to be able to see it. So these are some of the thoughts that I have coming through with Venus trining Pluto here at the beginning of the week here. So that is Monday, August 10th. And then if we go ahead and move forward into August 11th here, we have Mercury in the sign of Leo opposing Pluto. So all of these Plutonian underworld themes that we're talking about are still in play coming through here this week. there is a lunar interaction here that's relevant and worth noting. The moon is going to move into the sign of Leo right around 4:30 in the morning, and then it's going to conjoin Mercury at 9:40 in the morning, and it's going to directly oppose Pluto at 11 in the morning. So there is a time period, times are always Eastern time here, so between 9 a.m. Eastern time and noon p.m. noon Eastern time, there's this time where the moon is interacting with Mercury and the opposition to Pluto here at the same time. If I go ahead and move this chart forward here a little bit, I can get it to where you all can see that. So we're gonna just back this up some hours here. And this is not, okay, let's bring it back a smidge here. Okay, so you can see that we have the moon and Mercury sitting at 3 degrees, and then Pluto is in opposition at 3 degrees here. So in this morning time frame that we have here, there may be situations or environments that we find ourselves in that are expressive of that Leo Aquarius axis or that Plutonian type energy. Now the moon is in opposition to Pluto. Mercury is in opposition to Pluto, so there can be a little tug and pull. There can be more of a combination of that positive as well as kind of the less positive expressions that we can see with Pluto here. So that's worth noting about the morning period here. So Mercury in Leo will not hold back on what's in its heart, right? That authentic expression of Leo. When contacting Pluto and Aquarius, the dichotomy of self-expression as a singular unit, as a one, as an individual, versus the group or the systems that we find ourselves a part of, the communities that we find ourselves part of. And it's how we either do or do not fit in to these scenarios, right? Pluto, the lord of the underworld, reaches into those shadows, reaches into the dream world, reaches into those dimensions that seem perpendicular to reality. Think about the things that I mentioned from the Dreams in the Underworld book that written by James Hillman. Things that seem as though they should not exist do, right? I think about riddles, I think about puzzles, and I think about hidden things with Pluto, but I think about the riddles and the puzzles and hidden messages specifically with Mercury, because Mercury is the messenger. It's our thoughts, perceptions, communications, the tools and the resources that come through to us. So it's like, what are the messages that are coming through right now? What are the puzzling or perplexing things that kind of make us stop and think twice and question? Do they make us question part of our reality in some sort of way? Are they clues that maybe bring up the next clue and then bring us to the next clue, and it feels like we're following a trail of breadcrumbs in some sort of way? It can almost be maddening or having us question our sanity when we are interacting with Pluto. And I think specifically when it's Mercury in the opposition, it can feel mentally overstimulating. It can be like, what really is reality? What is not reality, right? Or there can be realizations of the deep-seated kind, those things coming up out of the shadows here that can show us different perspectives. There's a lot of different ways that this can happen here. We also have Venus moving into the opposition with Neptune here, so you can see that across the 1st and the 7th house axis in this chart here. You know, with Venus opposing Neptune, boundaries dissolve and the walls come down, right? This can allow us to either see the magic, but it can also leave us in an unrealistic fantasy. There can be delusions and illusions that show up in smoke screens that either cloud our judgment, or smoke screens that start to lift and we start to really see reality for what it is if we've been deceived in some sort of way. These oppositions, they come within the tug and pull. So there's reality and fantasy that can start to intermingle here, and it can be hard to tell the difference sometimes with Neptune. It can be very foggy and very illusory. There can be cloudy judgments, and there can also be inspired spaces. But sometimes those inspirations, they can either come from deep within and feel like we're connecting to something a little bit higher, a little bit deeper than ourselves, but it can also could be connecting us to something that feels that there's kind of some rose-colored glasses, or it feels a little bit better than what it really is, or like sounds good, looks good on paper, but then when you get there in reality, it's not quite exactly what you expected. And things can shift and change awfully fast with Neptune in the sign of Aries, you know, and also with Venus and Libra, they're both cardinal signs, so they're both starting and initiatory energies. Cardinal signs like to start, they like to initiate, and they like to bring forth change. They just do that in different ways. This planetary combination can be very romantically inspiring, and we can be intoxicated by the ideas, by actions, by different energies. So just making sure we keep ourselves grounded while we are inspired. We can be inspired to put forth great work when these two planets are coming together, or great inspirations that feel like they're otherworldly messages. You can feel like spirit is speaking to you when these two planets come together in any sort of way. Very creative, very passionate, and very romantic. Yeah, very romantic coming through here. So not only do we have these couple aspects that are going on, but Mars is also going to be moving into the sign of Cancer here this day. We're going to have Mars in the sign of Cancer until September 28th. Now, it's worth noting that Mars in the sign of Cancer is debilitated within its fall. It's interesting to note that during this time, both malefics will be in place of their fall. So this can be a metaphorical rock bottom to be able to rise up from. Or it can simply be an unfamiliar place that gives us different perspectives or different views. So if it feels like we're kind of put into scenarios or situations that feel a little unfamiliar, or a little bit like we're being tested in some sort of way, or we're kind of going against the grain, well, we have Mars and Saturn that are both in their fall, while Mars is making its way through the sign of Cancer before it moves into the sign of Leo the end of September. So moving through August and moving through September, that might be something for us to remember and keep an eye on. So when you have Mars in the sign of Cancer, it can be very, very protective. I think about standing up for the vulnerable or what is worth saving. Think about how the moon rules the sign of Cancer. So think about the lunar themes, right? We have the motherly theme, we have nurturing, we have the roots and the ancestry, we have the place that we've come from, we have our body and our memory, we have the environments and the circumstances that we find ourselves in, we have our emotional body as well as our memory body. These are very tender, sensitive spaces. The moon is the place of birth, the place of growth. It's the place of the womb, the place of the great mother, right? So this is the place where life is born and life is nurtured to be able to go forth. It's a safe space for us to be able to come back to retreat, and then to be able to move forward once we have rested and recovered here. So I think about standing up for that which needs to be advocated for. You have the mama bear or the advocate that goes out and takes action. They don't just talk the talk, they actually go out and walk the walk, and they stand up for others that might not be able to stand up for themselves. Or we feel the need to help others stand up on their own 2 feet in some sort of way, or help ourselves stand up on our own 2 feet too. You know, Mars in the sign of Cancer can be quite angsty and emotionally driven, and it can feeling into motivations, whether they're positive or negative. So like we're very emotionally invested in the actions that we are taking when Mars is in the sign of Cancer. It's like, be strong for those that can't be strong for themselves. Be strong for the weak, right? And help them be stronger, help them be safe, help give them a space where they can nurture to be able to grow from, but not always doing it with tact, right? Mars can be a little bit brush, a little bit gruff, and it can just say what it's going to say. It's very, very honest. So when we have honest emotional expression, that can be very polarizing, but it can also be very honoring, and it can also be very like it allows us to stand on our own 2 feet, right? It gives us strength, it gives us backbone, kind of like that. I think it's interesting to note that during this time that Mars is going to be in the sign of Cancer, we don't have any other planetary bodies that are going to be moving through the sign of Cancer, so other than the moon when it comes through there once a month. So Mars in the sign of Cancer is isolated in some sort of way. I think about working through lunar themes on our own, or working through lunar themes in a way that feels a little bit separating, or like we have to go out on our own. We have to be able to stand for ourselves, but in order to do that, it has to be like a solo journey in some sort of way. So that's just something to kind of toy with and leave with you. Themes of ancestry, family, or origin tensions may be present here. There may be some ways in which we need to come to terms with our emotional body or our memory body in some sort of way. Relationships with women and sisters and children and friends can all come through here in some sort of way as well. So Mars moves into the sign of Cancer here, just ahead of the solar eclipse that we have coming through on Wednesday, August 12th. I'm going to go ahead and move this chart forward here to Wednesday, so that way we can get to the place of the solar eclipse to go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm just going to go ahead and roll this chart forward here some. Okay, so solar eclipse comes through 20 degrees and 1 minute of the sign of Leo here. And we have some other aspects that are happening at the same time. We have Mercury that is coming through the trine to Neptune just hours before the eclipse comes through. Mercury is also making a sextile to Uranus, while it's also making a sextile to Venus in the sign of Libra here. Venus is coming through that exact trine to Uranus. And then we have the new moon, the solar eclipse that's happening at 20 degrees of Leo. So really, we have lots of beneficial, connecting, expanding, cohesive energies that are coming through with the solar eclipse. So this powerful seeding moment, this new moon that has much more longevity than just a regular lunation. So we have a new moon once a month. That starts our lunar cycle, right? It's the conjunction of the sun and the moon. Well, a couple times a year we get new moons that are close to the proximity of the south node or the north node, depending on where we're at in the zodiacal year. And this conjunction here is close enough to the south node that has just entered the sign of Leo to be a solar eclipse here. Solar eclipses are powerful seeding moments that have more longevity than just the lunation. So we can look at these in the context of the lunation cycle. So you can look at it in a month-long span, about 28 days or so. You can look at it in intervals of about 6 months until we get to the next solar eclipse that's going to come through in the sign of Aquarius in the winter season here in the Northern Hemisphere. You can look at them in cycles of 18 months, which is approximately the time frame that the nodes of the moon are in each sign. You can look at cycles of 9 years and 18 years. 18 years brings us back to the last time that the south node was in the same position. 9 years would bring us to the flipped axis, where the north node is in the opposite sign and the south node is in the opposite sign. So right now we have the north node moving into Aquarius, the south node moving into the sign of Leo. When we think of a south node Leo eclipse, we think about something that needs to be released, something that needs to be relinquished. The south node is a point of release. It's a point of letting go. It's a point of completing a path of some sort of kind. So if we have a new moon, a solar eclipse that is bringing in something new, bringing in some sort of change at the point of release, at the point of the south node, it's like what needs to be released, or what has finished its cycle or its life process and now is making way for something new. This can be one cycle completing itself and moving into another. This can be taking a history of the way something has played out before and bringing it forward to move in a different direction. So when we think about the sign of Leo, representing the heart space, representing that which connects us to our true, authentic nature, what connects us to our own center. Are we deluding ourselves, or are we standing in our own strength but doing it from a place of grace here, right? How can we stand up for ourselves? How can we express ourselves authentically? By moving in a different direction. Maybe You know, for some of us, the South Node in the sign of Leo is going to have something to do with the level of ego that we have. Is it a healthy level of ego, or is it inflated? Is it grandiose? Is there something that needs to be relinquished and let go? When we talk about Leo being authentic expression, maybe it's moving from a place of not always allowing your own truth to shine and maybe allowing others to have that spotlight a little bit more, but now we're stepping into the space where we can hold our own authenticity and do that in a extroverted type way, a way that other people can kind of see. We stand up for ourselves when we necessarily haven't before. So you can see how there's a couple different ways that this can go. Now, Mercury is sitting at 5 degrees of Leo here. This is the place that, this is right at the space that we just had the Mercury Cazimi come through here, as well as the place where the sun was at the full moon that we had in the sign of Aquarius that was conjoined Pluto. So that like 5-6 degrees of Leo has been really activated here right now in the last little while. So this feels like a powerful callback to maybe what has surfaced within that time. So think back within the last few weeks here as we've been talking about the Jupiter Cazimi. You know, that was a seeding moment for Jupiter in the sign of Leo and starting some sort of insights or some sort of knowledge that could have came through here in some sort of way. How can that play into the new season and the new cycle that you are coming through in the sign of Leo? Think about what is starting and what has been initiating, what has been brewing, where the house topics are, where you can find Leo in your own chart here. These powerful seeding moments come from the heart space. They come from the place of true, authentic expression from within us. But what do we need to release in order to do that? Is there a grandiose, egoic expression that needs to be humbled in a little bit of way? Do we need to stand for ourselves a little bit stronger? Do we need to hold our head a little bit higher and have a little bit more confidence in some sort of way here? The insights and the information found through Jupiter's Cazimi, that Sun-Jupiter conjunction, may play a role here. What did we learn as that came through here, right? When I think about the solar eclipse in the sign of Leo, and when we look forward into the future eclipses that we're going to have across the Leo and Aquarius axis, we don't have lunar eclipses that are coming through in the sign of Leo. They're going to come through in the sign of Virgo because there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of out of sign eclipses that are going to be happening through this cycle. So I think it's interesting that while we have the South Node in the place of Leo, in the place of the Sun, telling us that something has completed, the history of something is ready to be done. It's ready to complete its karma, right? We're moving forward to something different. Comes through with new moons, comes through with solar eclipses, of starting, of initiating something. It's not the height of something, it's bringing something new in. So it's this there's this repeated theme that we're going to have in August for the next couple years here of starting and initiating something new coming in here. And when I think about Leo, I think about it as the center. And sometimes that can come through as selfish or, you know, self-interest in some sort of way, of course. But really, when you think about Leo as the center of functionality, it's meant to benefit everybody that is around and that is within the sphere. When I think about Leo as the center, I think about the sun, I think about the king, and I think about the heart. So let's go ahead and break those down and just think about the archetype of Leo a little bit deeper here. I think now when we're talking about these three different archetypes or these three different spaces that we can find ourselves in, the sun, the king, and the heart, we're going to talk about how they are the center and how there's there's an interdependence on these things, on the Leo quality. But there's also a level of hiddenness or unreachableness or just slightly above in some sort of way. Not necessarily in a better or worse, but just in some sort of hierarchical type way, there's levels or there's steps here. So when we think about the king leads with strength, ideally, of course, right? So the king leads with strength, but also with consideration as what is best for the whole. The king is leading for his people and an ideal scenario and situation, correct? Considering what is best for the whole. There is unquestioned authority, but ideally that king rules on behalf of the common good, what is best for the whole. The king is always present, but the king is protected. So he's always there and he's always receiving information, but he's unreachable without clearance. So I imagine in most situations where there is a literal king of a space or of a land, you can't just walk up to the king and be like, hey, how you doing, king? There's security, there's guards, there are knights, there's an army that is protecting the king, right? So there's a level of elevation or elevatedness or specialness when it comes to the king. There's a level of we need to protect what is at the center, what is at the base, what keeps the rest of these things going. If we move forward and we think about the sun, the literal sun that is in the sky, it is the center of our solar system. Life as we know it would not exist without the sun. We cannot operate without the sun. If you think about the king of a land, if something happens to the king, there is chaos, and typically until somebody else takes the throne, or it's like you can't quite function without that leading force coming through here. So the sun is always there, and life would not exist without it, and we always know that it's there. However, if you think about the sun, you cannot look directly at the sun, at least not for very long. You can damage your eyes. So it's always there, but there's a level of which it's elevated because it's literally up in the sky, but it's elevated in a way that it's unreachable, similar to the way that the king is here. So this elevated status, this regal, royal status of Leo, finding that within ourselves, finding that within our own heart space. Speaking of the heart space, let's talk about that literal heart that is within each and every one of us. The beating heart is the measurement of life. The heartbeat stops and there is no life. When we are looking for signs of life, we check the pulse. If there is no pulse, then we are in trouble here, right? So the heart acts as the functional center for the body. It delivers oxygens and nutrients through the blood to the rest of the organs and to the rest of the body. It's the circulatory system, right? Everything travels. The heart pumps blood through the body, and the blood acts as a transport system for many, many different things that are moving throughout our body here. It's very, very vital, but it's also very, very intricate process at the same time. If you look at the anatomy of the heart, it's very detailed and it's very, very, very precise. If you think about the protective layer, the pericardium that covers the heart, it's like a thin sac that is around the heart, and it's protective. It protects the heart from friction. It protects it from overuse, and it helps keep it in its form and within its own space. So the heart, in a certain way, is not accessible because there is this it's very thin sac that is covering it. It's a protective layer around it. The king is protected by the guards and those that surround him. The sun is above us, and it might not necessarily be protected, but sometimes we need to protect ourselves from the sun a little bit. But we need that sun to be there at the same time. So there's kind of that like give and take, and there's that balance there. So when we think about this elevation, we think about this regalness, when we think about this lifting up and this royalty and this king and the heart and the sun, we all have that within us. These solar eclipses in the sign of Leo may very well be asking us to let go of the places that we are diminishing ourselves, the spaces where we are not allowing ourselves to shine the way that we really should be able to. Think about the house topics of where you can find Leo in your own chart and think about what has been going on there. These solar eclipses in the sign of Leo, in the place that the sun rules, the sun is in its home sign. So it's extra loud, it's extra proud, and it's extra expressive here, right? So these may feel like we're really able to lift ourselves up on a pedestal in some sort of way, but not without allowing everybody else to have their pedestal at the same time. The sun serves the solar system. The king serves the people. The heart serves the body, right? It has a vital function. We cannot operate without these things, but the thing is not operating independently without consequences to other things as well. So that is a message for us to remember in the sign of Leo here. So these other aspects that we have coming through here at the same time, you know, we have Mercury trining Neptune. This can be motivating through passion and creativity and a drive or a spark. Those are fire signs that are coming through here. Messages of otherworldly substances can come through, feeling deeply connected to something bigger than themselves. You know, meaning can exist here, authentic expression to the selves. Again, thinking about fire, these are masculine signs in the fire signs. Mercury interacting with Uranus and Venus feels very like cohesive relations coming through here. This feels like diplomatic actions, conversations, and being able to move maybe in different ways than we have before. There is a trine to Uranus from Venus, and there is a sextile to Uranus from Mercury. Maybe we're moving in different ways. Maybe we have a little bravery to step in a different way or think in a different way. Uranus being in the sign of Gemini is in Mercury's sign, so there is a reception between these two planets here at the same time. So like, it's kind of like the tools and the resources and the lessons that Uranus is laying down, Mercury totally gets, because they're very Mercury flavored, because it's Mercury sign of Gemini here. We may have different ideas, different thought processes. We might even be brainstorming or sharing different ideas with other people, with Venus being in the sign of Libra here. So this feels like a very liberating, very releasing eclipse here, but allowing us to step forward out of that space. How can we step forward, and what can we step into here? This can be very, very exciting for some of us coming through here. So that's the solar eclipse that comes through on Wednesday. And then if we go ahead and move this chart forward here, we're going to go ahead and just bop forward a couple days here to where on Saturday we have Mercury and Jupiter conjoining in the sign of Leo. Now we're in eclipse season through the rest of this lunation. We will have that lunar eclipse that will come up at the full moon period here. I like that Mercury and Jupiter are coming together after Mercury was sitting at the space where Jupiter was for its cazimi at the time of the solar eclipse. It feels like we keep getting callbacks to that Jupiter cazimi moment here. So that, for many of us, I feel like that was very an insightful moment where something was shown to us, something that could be a direction that we could go that we weren't necessarily seeing before, a little glimmer of light where maybe we were losing some sort of hope, or just an understanding from within us, right? A lot of this comes from within and is shining extrovertly outwardly. I think about loud, beneficial messages when we're talking in the sign of Leo. When we're in the sign of Leo in the place of the sun and Mercury and Jupiter are coming together, it's like, it feels like somebody taking like a loudspeaker and just shouting affirmations, right? Or just positive messages coming through here, or places of authenticity. I think about standing in front of the mirror and telling yourself, like, I am enough, I am strong, I am brave. I think about lifting others up, right? I think about, you know, a big warm hug that makes you feel like you are super supported in some sort of way here. So this feels like a really beneficial aspect coming through here at the end of the week here. And it feels like a callback to some of these other aspects that we've had earlier. So it might really feel like there's quite a bit of a process that is coming through here. So these are the aspects that we have coming through here this week. It really is quite a busy week. This solar eclipse that we have coming here, eclipses are always big deals. They're like super new moons, right? But this one here, you know, and the subsequent ones that are going to come with the sun in its home sign, they're extra loud and they're extra on display here. And again, I really think it's interesting that we are loaded up with the Leo solar eclipses, but not so much the lunar eclipses. So we're looking at the new moons, not necessarily the full moons of the eclipse cycles here. Okay, that's what I have for the aspects this week. Let me know what you think about not having the cards. Now that I've done it without the cards, I feel like I was ready to move to the next card and it kind of threw me off a little bit. But just playing with different things and trying different things, right? It's always good to kind of shake energy up a little bit in some sort of way. So, reminder, we do not have a live meditation this week, but if you meet us on Wednesday, August 12th, here a Meditative Astrology YouTube channel. It'll be live streamed to Facebook as well. We will have a live astrological meditation for the solar eclipse. So join us there. I'll see you back here next week for the weekly video, and I will see you on August 16th, Sunday, for our next Sunday meditation. All right, everybody have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and take care. Bye, everybody.